The day HOA Karen threw her ridiculous beach party on my private property began with two distinct, competing sounds: the obnoxious pop of cheap champagne corks and the low, chest-vibrating growl of a 900-pound Alaskan grizzly named Atlas, echoing from his secure habitat. You could hear the guests screaming, phones flying into the sand, and Karen's high-pitched shriek. That high-C frequency was probably audible all the way in the next county. She truly believed she was invading an empty stretch of pristine coastal sand for her exclusive neighborhood summer bash, a place she felt entitled to control. But what she didn't realize was that she was setting up her tiki bar 2 steps away from a perfectly licensed, reinforced wildlife reserve, and that I, Lucas Vance, the quiet guy she once fined for untrimmed palm fronds, was the legal caretaker of a bear big enough to crush her imported decorative seashell sculpture in one careless swipe. By the time the actual sheriff's deputies arrived, the margarita machine was overturned, the folding beach chairs were floating in the tide, and Karen was standing precariously on top of a Yeti cooler, yelling hysterically that I had deliberately unleashed a wild beast on taxpayer land. That's my hook, because, in truth, every absurd thing that happened that day started months earlier, when I simply decided to buy the single stretch of beachfront the HOA thought belonged solely to them. I never planned for revenge. Not really. But Karen, or Diana as her name was, made it absolutely inevitable the day she tried to ticket me on my own private sand. It all started when I moved into Sunset Reef Estates, a private coastal community with those postcard-perfect views, and, unfortunately, way too many rules. I'd left the grinding city life behind, wanting quiet mornings, that clean sea breeze, and most importantly, the necessary space for Atlas. Atlas had been with me since I rescued him as a tiny cub years ago from a horrifying, illegal roadside zoo, the kind of place that should never exist. The state had granted me a very specific, special wildlife permit to keep him in a secure, custom-built habitat on my land, which stretched much farther than most of the neighbors realized, almost all the way down to the low-tide line. Diana Vance, the HOA president, saw my arrival not as a neighbor joining the community, but as an opportunity to immediately flex every ounce of her self-appointed authority. She introduced herself during my first week with a smile that could honestly slice through thick glass, clutching a rigid clipboard like it was a deadly weapon. She quickly informed me that wild animals, unapproved utility sheds, and anything resembling masculine decor were not part of the delicate HOA aesthetic. I calmly showed her my official state permit, the one signed by 3 different regulatory bodies, and told her that Atlas's reinforced enclosure was exponentially safer than the unguarded community swimming pool. She just sneered, snapped a quick photo of the fencing with her phone, and walked away muttering loudly about potential property value contamination. The first few months were just an exhausting parade of official HOA letters, ridiculous fines, and incessant complaints. One day, she actually left a written note claiming that the faint sound of animal breathing at night was considered a neighborhood disturbance. Another time, she accused me in writing of using the sand dunes for illegal construction when I was just out there cleaning up windblown debris. She even hired a professional landscaper to trespass onto my land to measure my poor palm trees for height and trimming violations. The HOA board, bless their hearts, was utterly terrified of her, and most of the neighbors would pretend to agree with her during meetings while secretly texting me apologies afterwards. I stayed perfectly patient, focusing completely on my work and ensuring Atlas's habitat was far beyond code. Triple reinforced fencing, motion-activated floodlights, and double-locked gates. I never retaliated overtly. I just quietly recorded and meticulously documented everything she did, from her daily passive-aggressive harassment to her most outrageous, ridiculous claims. Then came the summer board meeting where Diana announced a grand community beach celebration, designed, she said, to show off HOA unity and beauty. The huge problem was, the glossy flyer she printed showed the designated event location smack dab on my side of the beach, the part one owned outright according to the county deed maps. When I politely pointed this out, she simply waved her perfectly manicured hand and said, with supreme arrogance, "Mr. Vance, the beach belongs to the people, the community." I replied, calmly and clearly, "No, Diana. That specific stretch of sand belongs to me, and to Atlas. The entire room fell silent. She laughed right in my face, attempting to dismiss me publicly, saying, "Well, you can bring your little teddy bear to the party if you promise to behave, Lucas." That was the exact moment. The decision was made. I realized I wouldn't stop her party. I would let her host it. I would let her discover who truly owned that sand the absolute hardest way possible. For weeks leading up to the event, I played the part of the sulking, defeated new neighbor. I mowed my lawn, waved politely when she drove by, and even passively offered my help setting up the massive party tents. She smugly declined, believing I was simply too embarrassed to face her. What she didn't realize was that I had contacted the sheriff's department, the county wildlife inspector, and the land office, making absolutely certain that every single detail about my property boundary and Atlas's legal presence was perfectly documented and ready to go. I even installed new, clearly visible boundary markers with certified GPS coordinates. Atlas's secure enclosure, while safe, was positioned just far enough inland that anyone wandering near would hear his low, earth-shaking growl carried perfectly through the sea wind. The morning of the party, the expensive SUVs began to arrive. Huge tents popped up. Loud music began blasting across the quiet coast. Diana, in a wide-brimmed hat and oversized designer sunglasses, strutted around, shouting orders like a self-important general. I sat on my porch, enjoying my coffee, watching her plant the enormous HOA banner dead center on my sand. Her husband, who always looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, tried to back their golf cart near Atlas's fence line to unload giant coolers. That's when it happened. Atlas rumbled, one long, thunderous, guttural growl that rolled across the shore like approaching distant thunder. The arriving guests froze. A few laughed nervously, thinking the HOA had hired someone to play a sound effect. Then Atlas stepped forward, sunlight catching his thick, powerful brown coat, towering impressively behind the reinforced glass section of his enclosure. Diana's expensive sunglasses slipped right off her face as the blood drained from it. She realized, with horrifying clarity, what she was actually looking at. Panic spread like wildfire. People screamed. Children cried. Someone's expensive photo drone fell straight into the sand. Diana ran toward me, her face contorted, yelling hysterically that I had deliberately endangered lives. I told her, calmly and clearly, that this was my private, legally designated wildlife habitat, and that every single inch of her highly anticipated party was currently trespassing. She tried to pull the public beach argument again, so I simply handed her the laminated map from the county office, with my deed highlighted in bright yellow. The look on her face when she realized her entire setup, including the ridiculous, expensive tiki bar, was sitting squarely on my property, was worth every single petty HOA fine she had ever levied against me. I didn't even need to call the authorities. Her own guests were already scrambling and leaving the beach in chaos. When Diana finally did call 911 in a blind fury, the responding sheriff's deputies reviewed my perfect paperwork, nodded politely, and informed her that she had violated private property laws. Atlas let out one last, deep, satisfied growl, as if punctuating the statement, and she nearly tripped over her own feet running back to her Mercedes. That was just the beginning. The story spread across the neighborhood like a wildfire, fueled by endless smartphone videos. The HOA's queen bee had thrown a costly party on land she didn't own, only to be chased off by a perfectly legal, well-behaved grizzly bear. The memes started within hours, but beneath the laughter, something darker was brewing. Diana wasn't done. That public humiliation had fundamentally broken her, and she vowed revenge. The morning after the party disaster, my phone lit up with messages from neighbors pretending to care, but mostly just fishing for gossip. I spent the morning cleaning up the plastic cups, soggy banners, and folding chairs scattered like war debris. Atlas watched me, his massive golden eyes tracking every movement, sensing the tension that still hung in the air. I gave him an extra serving of honey and salmon, a silent, grateful thank you. By noon, a formal letter arrived, taped to my gate. It was from the HOA, accusing me of operating an unapproved wildlife facility and claiming Atlas posed a direct threat to community safety and property values. I actually laughed out loud. The same woman who trespassed onto my beach was now pretending to be the voice of legal order. I immediately sent the letter to my attorney, Laura, who specialized in these property disputes. "They are bluffing, Lucas," she said, half amused. "Your state wildlife license is bulletproof, but if they push this, it could get messy. Document absolutely everything." I already had. That evening, I saw Diana pacing in her driveway, phone pressed to her ear, yelling wildly toward my house. Her husband, Robert, the quiet type, stood beside her with a defeated, exhausted expression. Atlas rumbled softly from behind the fence, his breathing slow and steady. Diana turned, glaring at the sound, then stomped back inside. The harassment escalated. I received another letter, demanding I remove Atlas within 30 days or face daily fines of $500. Laura laughed. "They can't fine you for something outside their jurisdiction. We'll hit them back with a cease and desist." But Diana was tireless. Next, a local news van reported a shocking story about the bear. When they tried to film near Atlas's habitat, I calmly stepped forward and handed the reporter my state license and the sheriff's business card. The reporter realized the story was garbage, and Diana's face flushed crimson as the camera turned away from her. She then filed a malicious complaint with the county environmental office, alleging Atlas was polluting the soil. Inspectors arrived, checked the filtration systems, and left laughing, telling me it was the cleanest enclosure they'd ever seen. It was preparation, not paranoia, so I installed tiny cameras along my entire property line, pointed toward the HOA's shared areas. One night around midnight, the alarm buzzed. The screen showed a shadow near the fence, a figure in a hoodie, holding a flashlight and a phone, filming the enclosure. It was Diana herself, looking like a cartoon burglar. I stepped outside quietly. "You're trespassing again, Diana." She stammered something about public safety. I pointed to the camera mounted above my gate. "You just documented your own break-in attempt." She paled, turned, and stormed off, muttering curses. That video went straight to Laura. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just being difficult. She was actively unraveling. The final straw came when she tried to stage an emergency HOA meeting right in front of my property, waving flyers that read, "Protect our neighborhood from the bear menace." Only 6 people showed up, and half of them left after I stepped out holding Atlas's permit folder. She shouted nonsense until one of the few remaining neighbors asked if she even had the authority to hold the meeting. She didn't. She slammed her papers and sped off, humiliated once more. 3 days of absolute silence followed, and that silence was more suspicious than any amount of screaming. I knew she was plotting. Samson was restless, pacing the enclosure as if sensing a storm coming. It came on Friday morning, not from Diana, but from a private law firm. The letter accused me of reckless endangerment and cited unregistered dangerous wildlife. The signature at the bottom wiped the grin off my face. Robert Vance, her husband, had become her legal proxy. This was her new strategy, a lawsuit designed to drain my wallet. Laura called, serious this time. They filed for an injunction hearing next week. "We need to prove compliance." I told her I'd been ready for this day since I first bought the land. That weekend, I doubled down on security. On Sunday, county inspectors arrived, with Diana watching from afar. They checked every detail, and one commented that he'd seen Atlas's file on a state wildlife poster about successful rehabilitations. Diana's face twitched. But before I could relax, the local news picked up her version again, framed as a neighborhood divided. I decided to fight back with the truth. I uploaded a calm, factual video showing Atlas's enclosure, his routine, the permits, and the inspector's report. Within 24 hours, it went viral locally. People loved Atlas. The backlash hit Diana hard. She cornered me again. "You've humiliated me. You turned the entire neighborhood against me." "No, Diana," I said softly. "You did that when you threw a beach party on my property." That night, my cameras picked up movement again. 2 teenagers sneaking near the fence, laughing, trying to film. They were likely dared by Diana. Atlas let out one low growl, and they ran, dropping their phone. I retrieved it and saw Diana's car parked down the road, headlights off, watching the entire thing. No coincidence. I went straight to the sheriff's office. The deputy assigned to the case shook his head. "She's pushing too far now. We'll add an incident note for harassment and endangerment." That same evening, she staged one last act of victimhood, standing in front of my gate, camera in hand, accusing me of harassment. Atlas, right on cue, walked up behind the glass and stared. She screamed, ran backward, and fell into a lawn chair. The clip went viral overnight. Diana had accidentally filmed her own humiliating meltdown. Around midnight, the final, reckless attempt came. I woke up to the sound of pounding. Flashing red and blue lights bounced across the sand. Diana was standing there, claiming Atlas had escaped. While the officers inspected the perfectly secured enclosure, I noticed a strange, fresh scrape near the gate latch. Someone had tried to tamper with the lock. Diana must have done it to stage an escape. If he had escaped, she would have endangered every life nearby. I took photos, and when the officers saw Atlas docile and unharmed, they warned Diana about filing false reports. A few days later, my audio recorders along the fence line caught exactly what I needed. Diana's unmistakable voice whispering to someone, "Cut it here. Just make it loose." The next morning, there was a new break-in mark near the lower hinge. I sent the clip to Laura. She contacted the sheriff's department. On Friday night, around 1 a.m., the cameras went off. I zoomed in and saw her, Diana, in dark clothes and gloves, creeping toward the enclosure. I called the sheriff. Within 10 minutes, red and blue lights flooded the beach. They caught her easily, fiddling with the latch. The deputies cuffed her, reading her rights as the neighbors watched from their balconies. Atlas gave a deep, low growl that rolled through the air, almost like applause. The next morning, the sheriff confirmed the charges: trespassing, vandalism, and reckless endangerment. The lawsuits kept coming. Diana, out on bail, sued me for emotional distress. At the small courthouse, she arrived in a pristine white suit, radiating false serenity. Laura presented the footage of Diana tampering with the locks, her midnight break-in, and her filing false reports. The courtroom was silent. When the judge asked for her evidence, Diana blurted, "No normal person would live with a bear." The courtroom chuckled. The judge dismissed her claim entirely and issued a restraining order, ordering her to stay a minimum distance away from my property. But the final act of recklessness came on a stormy night. I was checking the floodlights when I found the padlock on the southern enclosure gate cut clean through. The chain was loose. I rushed to the fence. There she was, Diana, in a slick raincoat, clutching a metallic tool. She shouted, "You can't keep him here." She twisted the secondary latch before I could reach her. The gate creaked open just enough for the wind to blow it wider. Atlas's low growl cut through the thunder. He rose to his full height, towering, roaring with a sound that rattled the air. Diana screamed, fell backward, and scrambled away. I managed to reach the gate, pulling it shut and latching it with my bare hands as the storm raged. Atlas stopped, looked at me, then retreated. I called the sheriff immediately. They found Diana huddled near the dunes, drenched and hysterical, babbling about saving the bear. They saw the cut locks and tools. She was escorted away under multiple felony charges: trespassing, destruction of property, and violating a restraining order. 6 months later, Diana's sentencing was announced. 6 months in county jail and a year of community service. The HOA dissolved completely. Atlas became a local hero. I received a strange handwritten letter postmarked from the county jail. It was from Diana. She wrote that she hadn't understood what she'd become and that she had built her identity around control until it consumed her. She said she didn't hate Atlas anymore, and in a strange way, she admired him. She wrote one final line: "I thought I was protecting this place, but I was really just afraid to lose it." I folded the letter. That wasn't my fight anymore. Months later, I received a call from Laura. She told me Diana had moved inland permanently and was volunteering at a wildlife shelter as part of her service. The irony was profound. One evening, I stood by the fence as the sun dipped low. Atlas was lying down, eyes half closed, breathing slow and even. I realized Atlas had become a mirror, reflecting every test of patience and restraint I had endured. The ocean whispered against the sand, carrying away the last remnants of Diana's chaos. I looked out at the waves, the sand, the peace. I realized the story wasn't about revenge or victory. It was about balance. The kind that only comes after chaos. The kind you can't force, but must earn. So what do you think? Did Diana ever truly change? Or was her move to the wildlife shelter just another twisted way to control her narrative? And what's the most outrageous HOA violation you've ever dealt with? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice earned.